This is LCC Radio WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. You're listening to the Lansing Online News Radio Show with Bonnie Bucqueroux and Bill Castanier. And we're going to be talking this evening with Valerie Marvin, who has a new job that we're going to talk about. That's very exciting. She is now the part-time state historian, and we're going to find out what that entails and whether she gets to add to the history or just tell us about it. And we're also going to be joined by Alex Bryan of the Garden Project, which is part of the Greater Lansing Food Bank Initiative. And so we're going to be talking about how I am going to be able to get out to my hoop house given the fact that the mosquitoes will carry me off. I think the mosquito should now become the state bird of Michigan. The ones in my hoop house are large enough. They look like those big woodpeckers that you see occasionally. I'm serious about this. I think little Lemmy is an endangered species. My little Chihuahua is going to be minus blood here pretty soon, the poor little guy. Every time he goes outside to relieve himself, he comes streaking back in about 2 seconds. How are you doing with the mosquitoes at your place?
Well, I've started to time how long it takes them to discover that you are outside. It's about 5 seconds.
Oh, really? You get them that long? Hey.
That fast. And then they start swarming.
Oh, it's unbelievable. Yeah. I was asking our old friend Bugsy Saylor, who's up in Marquette, and I was asking him, and he said they've got them up there too. So apparently it's a statewide phenomenon. It's not just down here. So you can't just go to the UP and get rid of them. Although I've heard, my sister told me that she went up to by Shush Mountain over the weekend, and they had very few.
Yeah, the beach in Empire this weekend was fantastic.
Really?
Good excuse to go to the beach, no mosquitoes.
So what do you think the deal is? Is it because the wind coming off the water? Or?
I think there's a lot of wind, and then just the heavy sands up there don't have a lot of standing water, so there's not as much breeding zone for the mosquitoes.
I think maybe a solar-powered fan at one end of the hoop house. That might be the only way. Seriously, otherwise I'll never get any food out of the thing, because no matter how much I, clothe myself. I even have one of those hats with the netting.
I saw one of your bee hats.
Yes, yeah. So that's
very attractive hat.
Oh yes, right. Just looks great. But little Lemmy pulled the string out of the bottom, so now you can't, tighten it around your neck. So it's a good thing I wasn't wearing it at the time, or I'd have choked to death. But we have news. You say that there's an author coming here to
right.
Schuler's.
Anna Clark is a young author from Detroit. Has written her second book. And it's a nonfiction book on the Michigan authors. She chose about a half dozen Michigan authors to profile. Most are dead, but
that's always safe.
It is safe. But she also picked one living author, Jim Harrison.
Oh wow!
She went after some unusual ones, like Theodore Retke, who was a poet from Saginaw.
Yeah.
Donald Goines, which very few people have heard of.
I saw you wrote about him in City Post this week, and I know Goines.
You know Goines.
Yeah. He was an interesting character.
He was very interesting. He wrote a lot of his books while in prison for various drug offenses.
Yeah.
He ultimately ended up dead. He was killed in a drug-related shooting in his home where they killed he and his spouse. Mm. He wrote something like, I forgot how many books, 30 books. A lot of them have been made into movies. He was the original hip-hop writer, or he wrote the first kind of pimp books.
Was he sort of the precursor to a Walter Mosley?
Oh, very much so, yeah. But way, way cruder.
Right, he was gritty.
Yeah, he was very gritty. And what she did in the book was kind of unusual, compared him to Elmore Leonard. Who wrote at the same time, who wrote about urban crime, but in a totally different way.
Did that make sense when you read it?
It did. Oh. I wouldn't have thought of it, but it made sense to me. She carried it off.
Are there Michigan writers that you thought she should have included and didn't?
Of course, but like she said, she has nightmares about that.
Oh,
she left out.
Yeah.
And a job like that, a book like that is so much work, she's not sure she'll do it again. Because she knows, she's smart enough to know she's not going to be making money off that book.
It's an odd book, isn't it? I mean, that's what's it called? Michigan Literary Luminaries?
Right, Michigan Literary Luminaries. She's going to be at Schuler's in Okemos tomorrow at 7 p.m. That's Tuesday, 7 p.m.
Now, did she include Hemingway, your favorite?
She had to. She said, how can you do a book like this and leave him out?
You couldn't, could you?
No, not because it's the first thing. You try to avoid criticism right away.
There is sort of, from the day that you facilitated the conversation there at Wharton, that we certainly have a trilogy of famous living writers here in Michigan. So when you say that most of them are dead, that means she didn't include Richard Ford?
She did not include Ford or Tom McGuane.
Wow.
And I think she did that on purpose in the first go-around. If she does a second book, she'll probably pick up more And I'm sure there's hundreds of people telling her who else should be included
Oh,
in
I'll
this.
bet. I'll bet.
It's a difficult choice to figure out which authors to profile, because Michigan, probably contrary to popular belief, has had hundreds of very famous authors.
If you had to pick the most stellar writer to come out of the state, and I think for you it would probably have to be a tie between Hemingway and Harrison, wouldn't it?
Oh.
No?
Hemingway, but to a minor extent, because he grew up here in the summers.
True.
Spent 18 summers here. But did he live here extensively? No. If I had to pick a truly, truly Michigan author, that's really hard. See how hard it is? Jim Harrison, of course, is Joyce Carol Oates, but she only lived here maybe 5-6 years. She lived in Detroit and then Sarnia. But she said her writing was sort of defined by Michigan.
Interesting. I'm not sure I would have thought of her.
Well, a lot of people don't, because a lot of people don't know.
I stopped reading her years ago.
I stopped reading her 20 years ago. She writes 2 books a year. She just is a machine.
Well, but there is our friend down there, in the woman who I'm struggling to come up with her name.
Down where, though? What?
The National Book Award runner-up.
Bonnie Jo
Campbell.
She's a good writer. She's got a new book coming out this fall.
Oh, does she?
She went back to her short stories, which was a very smart move. She's a very, very good short story writer.
Wonderful, yeah. American Salvage, that was what I was
American
trying to
Salvage, and she might have a chance at National Book Award again, because these are really a continuation of those really gritty, tough stories. Another author that's going to be recognized this summer for the almost 20 years he spent in Michigan is Carl Sandburg.
I hadn't even thought about
He
him.
lived down in Hobart, Michigan,
Wow.
down by the Indiana border. He wrote his Pulitzer Prize book here, the Lincoln Years, one of the Lincoln Years books. So, and the only reason he moved is his wife wanted to have a bigger place to raise goats.
Goats?
Yeah, 'cause he lived right on Lake Michigan, and his neighbors kind of started to not like the goats, which is no surprise.
They will come nibble on you and do all
Everything.
sorts
So they moved. So maybe, Carl Sandburg is a...
Wow.
Maybe, Val, you might have an idea of an author.
Yeah, Valerie Marvin. Now that she's our state historian.
Let me qualify that state capital historian.
Oh, aha. But that means that you limit yourself to the history of the capital?
It does.
I see.
Which is a big enough topic for me.
Certainly. It's a huge topic.
See, I'm interested in the Sandburg because I was recently down at Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois.
Oh,
and they also claim Sandburg.
Oh, yeah, they
in
did.
that part of Illinois.
He was, that's probably his first stop on his literary tour. Then he went to North Carolina, where he died. His house is intact down there in Carolina. But in Illinois, he was a very radical writer. He was closely aligned with some very radical movements.
Really?
He was a labor writer. Mm-hmm.
Wobbly? Was he a wobbly?
Not quite that.
Not quite?
No. He wrote a lot of children's books, which people aren't.
I don't think of him as a children's book author.
No, most people don't.
Wow.
And he wrote songs.
Well, you
He was a
put together a talk that you deliver every once in a while about the literary lights of Michigan, and
I go over
100 of them?
More than that, 150.
Whoa!
And you have to go very fast.
I'll bet.
There's just terrific number of authors, and goes forever.
It's astounding, isn't it?
The children's author from Eaton Rapids. Or the one we were just going to do an event with.
Deb
Holling
Deason?
C. Holling.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Who wrote
Paddle to the Sea.
Paddle to the Sea, which will be 75 years old next year.
well, Deb Deason, children's author,
Deb
huge
Deason,
here.
Current children's author.
Yeah.
Patricia Polacco is a well-known children's author at this point in time. She does a lot of books based on historical events. Her family actually are Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe, and she has several books about keeping family traditions and family objects and so on. And it's really interesting to see how she weaves these historical narratives but ties in themes that are very contemporary. And she's very popular with a lot of elementary school students.
She had a learning disability when she was growing up, and probably she basically says she was saved by a teacher who knew she could do things, and then she went on and got her PhD in art as an art historian before she began writing children's books.
Wow.
She's a pretty neat lady.
Yeah. Sounds like she's had 3 or 4 lives.
She has.
Yeah.
And they're all very interesting. She's originally from Williamston.
Well, that sort of segues nicely into upcoming events here in the community. Don't forget Anna Clark, when that is tomorrow?
Tuesday?
Tuesday?
Tomorrow, 7 p.m. at Schuler's in Okemos.
In Okemos, and it's Anna Clark.
Anna Clark. And she also wrote a book, or was editor of a book that won a notable book award last year, and it was a collection of Detroit stories.
Ah.
She's a good editor, too. She's a mover and shaker in Detroit. She's 26 years old.
Wow.
Which goes again to prove you can be anything you want down there.
Yeah, it is an interesting area right now, isn't it? Yeah. Well, we're joined by Valerie Marvin, and she has some upcoming events that we need to know about as well. The Historical Society of Greater Lansing is always busy. I know that even before the show, she and Bill were conferring about the upcoming photographic exhibit that they're going to be doing this fall, and that's going to be astounding. That's going to be looking at all
Called From
these.
Sepia to Selfies.
Oh, that's a nice title. I like that.
It's about 150 years of photography, and the base of the exhibit is actually coming to us from the Clark Library up at Central Michigan. They did a photographic exhibit that Bill happened to see several months ago, and it traces the history of photography, the different inventions that have changed photography and photo processing and so on. And it's designed in such a way that it can be supplemented with photos from different towns across the state. So we are working in conjunction with the Clark. A picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, it's also worth a lot of historical information too. And it's fun to see what you can discover. One thing we're going to be talking about is how to date photos, because a lot of people inherit this box of family stuff. Yes. And how do you know who's who? Well, it's a challenge, but there are tricks. A lot of women date photos based on fashion. If you know where the hemline was, what the hairstyle was, what kind of hats women were wearing, if she's in gloves, what her shoes look like, that's one way.
Cars in the background.
Cars are another one. Architecture.
Yeah.
Where is it? And okay, if it's in
when
front
did that building
of this
come down?
church, when was it built? When did it come down? When did they put the addition on? If it's a color photo, when was the house painted green instead of white? So there are all kinds of little clues that are there if you just know how to interpret them.
And there aren't very many Polaroids from the 20s, so.
No.
So that'll help you a bit too.
It's also interesting how people put photos together. We have some scrapbooks that we're going to be showing bits and pieces of. Bill and I were going through one last week, a couple scrapbooks from the Winans family, which, of course, the Winans had dairies in Lansing for a long time. And this was a family that was of some means. It's a lot of the scrapbooks are from the early 20s, and you can see what the family did for fun. You know, you can see them boating out on Lake Lansing. You can see them traveling around the country. You can see them dressed up in funny costumes for various things. And sometimes it's not just funny. Sometimes there's a darker story there. There's a photograph we were looking at last week that we were discussing, okay, do we exhibit this? Is it appropriate? That shows a whole bunch of people dressed up in different ethnic costumes, finger quotes there, for those of you just listening. There's one woman who I think is attempting to wear something like a kimono, which of course in the 20s would have been something oriental. Even more interesting and more telling is there are a couple people in the photo who are actually in blackface.
Yeah, minstrel. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a...
There are also photos where you see a whole group of women all dressed up performing a mock wedding. Some dressed as women, some dressed as men. You have a pastor, you have a groom, the whole bit. And those mock weddings were actually popular local entertainment events, and a lot of times clubs would do them for fundraisers.
Isn't that bizarre?
Actually.
So I don't think a lot of people, they'll look at that and go, what is this?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what you want, the reaction you want.
Are you familiar with the book Wisconsin Death Trip by Michael Lacey?
Yes.
Yeah, he
am.
found all of those old glass plates in a photographer's discarded studio, and he looked up the life story. He took bits and pieces from the newspapers at the time, and one of the ones that I remember so well was the young woman who had married an abusive husband, and she had committed suicide by eating the heads off matches. And there were all these grim stories that he told with these very sad-looking people in photographs. Now, part of that is because in that era, you had to hold still for so long while your photograph was being taken that most people put on a somber experience, because if they tried to smile, they looked so phony by the end that their lips were moving. They couldn't hold it long enough.
Well, and think about, too, a newer, cheaper version of the portrait.
Right.
You don't smile like an idiot in a portrait. This is for posterity. You want to look very, very dignified.
Serious. Yes.
And I think a lot of people would be, a lot of historical figures would be mortified if they see how people grin today.
For selfies especially.
Yeah.
That's part of the point of it.
But when they first started out, photography was also exclusively for the rich, because
Yes.
it was not a poor person's
No.
medium. I mean, it has certainly come down and dramatically in price over the years.
Well, the funny thing is, most people think of it as being a modern phenomena, but you can argue that the Brownie camera was actually what really made photography available to the masses.
Yeah.
My grandparents were not wealthy at all, but they had a Brownie camera, and that was their opportunity. Now, they might have not been able to afford a lot of film for it, but that was their opportunity to have a camera.
Well, you
and that
send
was
in the whole
close
camera.
to 100 years ago.
You didn't just take the film out of the back, you sent in the whole camera. So that was a totally different experience. I mean, we know that the daguerreotypes, do you have daguerreotypes going back to the 1860s?
We've got the daguerreotype, but not a daguerreotype camera.
Okay.
There's a camera that could have been used for daguerreotypes, but it wasn't. I know it wasn't because I own it.
Oh,
So you can tell because there's no water stains. It was never used for wet plate photography at all.
you're listening to LCC Radio WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. We're talking with Valerie Marvin, who is the state capitol historian for the state of Michigan right now. And we're talking about their upcoming photography show for this fall. Are there still blanks that you're looking for in your search for what you'd like to have in the show?
Absolutely. We definitely are looking for more vernacular style photographs for Lake Lansing.
By which you mean people just...
Average people shooting average photographs. Typically they'd be in a photo album. But people having events at Lake Lansing and also showing the rides.
Oh yes, the old carousel.
There has to be a lot of those out there, but we have not come across them.
Isn't that odd?
It's very odd. Would be interested in anybody that has any photography of horse racing in Lansing, which is turn of the century, but people...
Testing 1 2 3, testing 1 2 3, testing 1 2 3.
Those are those. Also rowing.
Ah.
No one knows of any photos existing of the early rowing on the Grand River, which goes back to the 1880s, 1890s. There are photographs we're looking for, strangely enough, they haven't come in yet, but there's millions of them out there, I'm sure. The big snowstorms.
Yes. Oh yeah.
67, 76.
Yeah.
And there's snowstorms before that. And amazingly, we've got people love taking pictures of floods. Got lots of photographs of floods, fires, catastrophes.
No good.
So no matter what, people rushed out and took photographs of those things.
I could do a nuclear event for you, but it would require us a little Photoshop help, I think.
We're also looking for photographs that represent the different ethnic groups that have lived in Lansing over time.
Yeah.
So, for example, I would love photographs from a quinceañera, from a Hispanic family in the area. Photographs from African American families. One thing we're going to be talking about in the exhibit is the construction of 496 and how that decimated a large African American neighborhood right downtown.
Destroyed it.
The Capital Area District Library's Forest Park Archives has a wonderful collection that was put together by the Stebbins. Stebbins was a real estate company for a long time, old name in Lansing. And they have photographs of homes that lined the streets prior to the construction of the highway, and you can actually look and see who was living in them. Sometimes you can learn, what their profession was, get an income price point for them even based on census records, and you can see who's being targeted when the state decides to build a highway. And this, at one point in time, had been a much more fashionable neighborhood, but as people continue to move out of the city, suburbia comes to exist. What were big, beautiful homes were cut up into apartments.
Right.
Many of them became rentals, and it became some lower income housing. You start to see a significant African American population, and these are populations that are completely ignored. And when the state decides they're going to build the highway, you have no choice. It doesn't matter if it's your home, it doesn't matter how long you've lived there, it doesn't matter that you may have nowhere else to go. You have to move.
I know. I watched it happen in Cleveland when I was a child, as they built the Interbelt Freeway there around Cleveland, and the same sort of thing happened. The previous mansions had fallen into decline until they were really part of the urban renewal projects. So, well, we'll just buzz a highway through here, and that'll take care of the issue without regard for the people who live there.
And it guts entire sections of town and entire subcultures.
Yeah.
It's interesting to think they're talking in Detroit about taking down some of the highways, right? I mean, sort of reversing some of
Yes.
those trends, and which is really fascinating when we think about the evolution of a city and how it might change over time.
Well, especially in Detroit, of all places, too, since they invented the highway.
Exactly.
I know, and they did their level best to kill public transportation, so we had to have the highways because it helped sell more cars. It is a challenge to look at that because during the Eisenhower era, the building boom of the highways was credited with being an awful lot of the reason behind the prosperity of that era, but also at the same time, it allowed people to leave those public spaces in urban areas and move further and further away, which added to the fossil fuel consumption, all the kinds of problems that we're dealing with nowadays. I was thinking the other day, I was looking at that picture, someone had posted a picture from Mount Clemens that showed children of different races playing outside on a sidewalk in front of a supermarket in town. And it was taken in 1984. It was the photographer for the newspaper who had posted that on Facebook. And they were talking about the loss of innocence when kids of all races and all walks of life still lived in a mixed neighborhood where the economics were mixed. And they would congregate on a public street like that. And I also noted in my comment that nowadays those parents would be arrested for neglect because there wasn't an adult there helicoptering over on top of them, making sure that those kids were being watched, right? So, I mean, progress has been a mixed blessing in many ways, and telling that story must be difficult.
It'll be interesting to see how it comes together. There are also actually construction photos of the highway being put in.
Oh,
which
interesting.
will be unique as well.
Bonnie, a couple things I want to add to what we're looking for. You mentioned Polaroids. Those are not the easiest things to come by.
No, they faded quickly.
Right, so we are looking for the early Polaroids and the later ones, the 59, and then I think the 80 is when the Swinger came in,
Right.
roughly. We're also looking for photos of vaudeville, photos of Prohibition, and probably the gold at the end of the rainbow is a photo of Malcolm X in Lansing.
Oh, would that be wonderful? Is there one that you know of?
Yes.
He's zeroing in on one.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Well, there is a photograph, the only photograph I know of him in Lansing that is readily, well, it's not even readily available. It's in a yearbook of
Big Red.
his middle school, which
Middle school.
a very rare book. No one I know has it. We're looking for that.
What school was that, and what year would that be?
Pleasant Grove, 1950s.
Wow.
Maybe 40s. Yeah.
Maybe somebody could go up to the attic and.
Yeah, we hope.
Yeah.
But there are photographs in this community of Malcolm X that
Wow.
are not coming out.
Oh, that would be fantastic.
I think it would be incredible.
See, one of the photos I had sent you is that when there was talk about Cesar Chavez, changing the name of the streets, right? Everybody was saying, well, he has no ties to the area. And then I went back into my little archive where I had photographs of him at Michigan State. So, I mean, almost everybody's come through here at one time or another. So, just culling it down is going to be a challenge, isn't it?
Well, and being the state capital, we attract all sorts of personalities. Also with the university, just think about presidential debates, celebrities coming in for different events. We're also going to have a section on demonstrations at the state capitol, and some of the rather interesting groups that draws. There was, of course, the news in South Carolina about the big KKK rally. Well, Lansing, Michigan has had KKK rallies too over the years.
Indeed. YouTube took down the video my student shot because they said it was too incendiary. What he actually did was just put up the speeches because everybody else just took highlights and he put up the speeches. They felt it was propaganda, so YouTube killed it.
Wow.
Which was too bad, so he lost that video, which was unfortunate. So anybody putting up videos on YouTube, make sure to keep a copy because it'll come back and bite you later if they decide they don't.
One of the hard things will be, okay, who are the celebrities from Lansing? There's some obvious ones, but who are the less obvious and who are the celebrities over time? One we want to add and will add is like Julie Crone, who just won
the jockey?
5 Grammys.
Oh.
So
Julie Crone?
Mother's Anne Crone.
Maybe I don't know.
Yeah.
What genre?
Musical.
Oh, didn't know.
Yeah.
Shows you what I know.
Yeah, she was her and her co-writer were the first women to win a Grammy for writing a musical.
Wow.
So, I mean, that's huge.
Well, you also have some walking tours coming up that we need to know about?
We do. This Saturday at 10 o'clock, we will be meeting at Lansing City Hall, and in conjunction with the Taste of Downtown event that Downtown Lansing Inc. is sponsoring later in the day, we're going to be doing a tour all about restaurants. Still in existence, like Kewpie's, but also many that have gone away. Places like Dine's, Archie Tarboff's, Fu Ying Cafe, where a lot of people had their very first Chinese food. Places also like Jim's Tiffany, which existed until relatively recently. But again, when you talk about big life events, a lot of those take place at restaurants. People would have the wedding breakfast after their ceremony at a restaurant. We all probably remember our first date at a certain restaurant. I can tell you where my husband and I went on our first date to eat in the Lansing area. These are important places, and a lot of our nostalgia is tied to food. And that's true not only of what Mom made, but that's true of the special meals we ate over the years, too.
Lansing was the classy place to come, too, from other cities, because the first husband, as I've told you many times, marry early, marry often, that's my motto. The first husband had a good friend named Larry Pontius, the late Larry Pontius, who went on to become an ad exec. And they lived in Jackson, and he wanted to propose, and so you came to Tarpoff's because that was the classy place to come. Worked it out with the waiter, where when they came in and they had one of those silver salvers, where they lifted it off to show the dish, and what it was bouquet of roses with the engagement ring in the middle. Now that's classy.
That is.
Brought it in with champagne. I mean, that's romantic.
Well, and when you think about it, it makes sense that we would have nicer restaurants because of the whole wine and dine idea with the state. How many lobbyists have twisted arms over a good meal somewhere?
And had an expense account to do it on.
Yes, they did, and maybe an adult beverage with it too along the way.
Yes.
And places like the Olds Hotel were places not only where you would have legislators and lobbyists and execs for companies coming together to wine and dine. Sometimes they would have major parties there. These were also places where you would host balls, dances. A lot of groups from MSU would come out, and they would have the J-Hop downtown Lansing.
Yeah.
That was where you went for these big formal events.
That level of formality has pretty much dropped out of the culture, hasn't it? I mean, we don't see those kinds of formal events anymore. The only thing I guess we see them with are the daddy-daughter dances, where everybody dresses up for those. Those are the ones that maybe they've survived.
Yeah, I seriously doubt that there's very many dances on MSU's campus where they dress up in tuxes.
No. Maybe some of the fraternities and sororities do that kind of thing. They actually do have a formal.
Do they have a formal?
The Spartanette went. And if anybody, is as iconoclastic as they come, if the Spartanette went, it must still be a thing. We'll have to find out. That'll be interesting. We'll do.
And then next Thursday, this Thursday.
This Thursday at the State Capitol, switching hats.
Yes.
I'm going to be doing an architectural tour. We are doing a series of tours over the period of the next 4 months. One particular aspect of the building we'll be zeroing in on. So this month I'll be talking about the history of the architecture. Next month, Matt Van Acker, who's the director of the tour guide service, is going to be doing a tour of the grounds of the building. May Euler, who's on the tour guide staff in September, will be doing a tour all about women in the state capitol. And then
very short tour. Oops.
And then in October, I'll be doing a tour all about the artwork in the building. Everything from portraiture to sculpture to the decorative paint that we have throughout the building, as well as telling stories of some of the artists who've worked there over the years.
Interesting.
So this Thursday's tour is going to look at the architectural roots of the building. Most people don't look at the Capitol and think of classical Rome, but it's interesting because so many of the elements of classical architecture survive in America largely only in Capitol buildings.
Right, those public spaces like that.
And that was done very intentionally. Our Capitol buildings were designed to look Roman. If we were going to have a republic, if we're going to emulate Roman government, well, we can't have palaces, we can't have parliament buildings, we need something different. So we skipped 1700 years of history and reached back and said, let's try this.
Yes.
And started building little Roman temples for our Capitol buildings. And of course, they grow and take slightly different forms over the years. But I like to think that someone coming out of Rome, if they could time travel forward, would not feel that uncomfortable when they looked at the Capitol. What's funny, though, is the things that we get wrong about Roman architecture. For example, the myth that Roman buildings were white. Well, the problem is, by the time we were excavating them in the late 18th century, the paint had worn off.
Right.
But if you look online, there are some great examples of artists who've taken classical buildings and sort of retooled them and painted them virtually as to how they think they might have been. I mean, imagine the Capitol building.
They were gaudy,
Oh,
actually.
they were. In bright red, in green, in gold. Most of us would just look at it today and go, ew.
Yeah.
But that was what they were. Mind has gone over to the white, the light building. This is clean.
Elegant.
And it's even a part of our national music. Think about America the Beautiful. Thine alabaster cities gleam. This is part of our identity, and it's totally wrong.
Right. Well, any day now, though, we can pick up some original Greek statuary, because they're going to be getting rid of everything they have, now that there's a fire sale over there, so maybe we can just go back to the originals. So you're going to be explaining some of that background. Mm-hmm. Cool.
We're going to talk a little bit about what architectural elements you see on the building. So there will be a crash course in what is a modillion, what is a pilaster, what are dentils. We'll also talk about the materials in the building. A common misconception a lot of people have is that the Michigan State Capitol is built of Michigan materials. No, it's not. It's built of sandstone from Ohio. It's built of cast iron from Philadelphia. The interior floors, the black and white checkerboard floors, are from Vermont. Why? Why is the Michigan Capitol full of products from other states? Well, part of it's the story of mass production. Yeah. Philadelphia was the center of cast iron production. They're making the best cast iron, so why not use it? On the other hand, though, we were also pretty frugal when we built the building, and if we could get a better deal with something from the next state over,
it's always the lowest bidder. Yes,
it
is. I don't know that local mattered as much in that era either, because there was something classy about bringing things in from other places.
Well, and it's funny to see times when we do tick off the locals, if you will. So, for example, the desks in the House and the Senate chambers are walnut, which was the wood of choice at the time. But when we put out the bids for them, the lowest bid came in from a company in Chicago. Well, here's something interesting. In the 1870s, Michigan was the leading furniture producer in the nation.
Yes, it was.
You could hear the groan from Grand Rapids and from Saginaw all the way to Lansing. Yeah. And there were many companies who approached the legislature and said, wait a minute. And they said, sorry, if you would have had lower prices. Mm-hmm. But what constitutes a low price is also an issue. You know, those desks on the chamber floor cost just under $14 a piece. Sounds like a great deal until you consider the fact that the average person laying bricks for the building probably earned between $1 to $1.50 a day.
Yeah. Not good. We want to make sure we get money churning in this state. We need to collect more tax dollars and spend them all. That's what there's a popular position, right?
You're not going to be running for president,
Apparently
governor,
not.
or any other elected official.
I think maybe Donald Trump will tap me. He may be the only one willing to have somebody that outspoken. Well, so that's going to be what day?
That is Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock. You do not need to reserve anything in advance. Just come into the Capitol building, check in at the tour desk, which is on the ground floor, just inside of the east wing, that's the front wing, and let us know that you're there for the architectural tour.
That sounds wonderful, and I say, as a photographer, that the rotunda in the Capitol is one of the most stunning things I have ever seen. I was just amazed. I mean, I bought a beautiful wide-angle lens, the best lens I've ever owned. It was my gift to myself when I thought I was retiring, but didn't. And it's just incredible. It's just beautiful. You could spend your whole life just photographing that rotunda. It's absolutely amazing.
I will tell you, I've seen this building every day for 10 years, and it does not get old.
Oh, that's good to hear. Yeah, it's not just me. It is stunning. Well, thank you very much. Wonderful
Always a
tour.
pleasure.
We felt like we've had a real tour here tonight. Yes.